So on this day, 80 years ago, this is how the Daily Express reported the day's news on Thursday, May the 3rd, 1945. The most tremendous news night of the war. Army of 1 million surrenders. Hitler and Goebbels suicide. Holland, Norway end is near. All through last night, the most dramatic news of the war was pouring into the Daily Express office, showing that the Nazi resistance is near its end. 1. The army of 1 million men in Italy and Western Austria surrendered, yielding a vast area of the southern redoubt. 2. Berlin fell to the Russians. Hitler and Goebbels are reported to have committed suicide. 3. German resistance in Holland was reported over. An early surrender in Norway and Denmark is expected. 4. Large German forces seeking to escape into Denmark have been cut off by a British drive to the Baltic. And then we lead with the main news. Berlin falls. Nazi boss tells Russians about Führer's fate. Adolf Hitler, Joseph Goebbels and General Krebs, newly appointed German chief in staff, killed themselves in the last fortress in the last scene of the last act of the Battle of Berlin, according to a communique issued by Marshal Stalin just before midnight. The authority for the statement is given as Hans Fritsch, Goebbels' deputy and star broadcaster, who talked after he was captured. No details of the manner of the Nazi leader's suicide are given, no mention is made of finding the bodies. But it is most unlikely that Stalin would issue Fritsch's statement in a communique unless the Russians had absolute proof. So we have resistance in Holland over. San Francisco Wednesday. Authoritative sources today said that German resistance in Holland has ended and that a formal announcement of the Nazi surrender there may be expected at any time. The same sources forecast an early announcement of a German surrender in Norway and Denmark, but said that operations in those countries have not yet ceased. Then we have information about the war ends in Italy. General Bohm on the phone in Stockholm. Hundreds swim the Elbe to surrender. What has happened in Italy, Austria and on other fronts is being repeated today and tonight on the Ninth Army front, where the German collapse has reached chaotic proportions. German soldiers are swimming the Elbe in hundreds to surrender to the Americans as the Russians close in behind them. Everywhere along the Elbe, hundreds of thousands of German soldiers and civilians are pressing down the banks waving white flags. The Russians, surging in on tidal wave proportions, have made still another contact with the Americans at Ballo on the Elbe, where they exchanged patrols with the US 84th Division. German planes are landing on American airfields. 3 came down today in the 16th Corps zone. The pilots asked only to see their families before being led away to prison cages. And then we'll go on the inside. Europe is filled with men seeking bloody vengeance. And this is about a Daily Express man who escaped from the Germans. And we have all sorts of kind of hearsay rather than factual stories here and there. Führer Dönitz gets his answer. He called on all Germans to fight to the last and fight on. The tail of his broadcast bombast comes the news of mass surrenders such as never been known in this or any other war. Nearly 1 million Germans and fascists in Italy and Western Austria surrendered unconditionally to Field Marshal Alexander. Surrender is imminent in Holland. At the same time, 70,000 Germans laid down their arms in the ruins of Berlin, and there is a report from those same ruins that Hitler and Goebbels committed suicide before the end of the city came. Truly, all the gods in Valhalla look down this day to mock at the last frantic convulsions of the nation that worshipped them. Churchill's plan. This major collapse in the south is great and glorious news, and especially for the people of Britain. They cheered Mr. Churchill when he announced it at the House of Commons yesterday, for they knew well that this was the rounding off of his own master plan. The Italian campaign, from the first to last, was Mr. Churchill's long before it was possible to land a single Allied soldier on the European mainland. He had his eye on the soft underbelly of the Axis. That dangerous but conclusive operation The Anzio beachhead was Churchill's own conception. He never wavered in his belief that splendid results could be achieved, first by attracting some of the best of the German fighting men to the south, and then pounding the life out of them all the way up to the mountain backbone of Italy. How right it is that this surrender of close on 1 million men should be made to Field Marshal Alexander and the army groups who first invaded Hitler's Europe. It was their due, this great event, which may well be the virtual end of the German war. For these were the men who shook down the first of the dictators. These were the men who freed the first of the great capitals of Europe. These were the men who fought on sternly and steadily when the eyes of the world were turned away from them to the beaches of Normandy, when they knew that there would be neither the men nor materials to enable them to deal with swift, decisive blows in the months ahead. And we have all sorts of bits and pieces. Rumours and reports. Hitler asked for Churchill. Before Moscow flashed the news last night that Hitler and Goebbels had killed themselves, rumour chased rumour about how Hitler died. There were reports of his madness and of his association, and there were too reports of Himmler, Goebbels' getaway by U-boat to Japan. It is told by Count von Meyerdorff, aide-de-camp to Himmler. Meyerdorff's story of the last meeting between the Nazi chiefs has reached Paris from the German-Swiss frontier. This is it. Goebbels received them and drew them into a corner. Our Führer has gone mad, Goebbels murmured. He has been raving for 2 days. He wants Churchill and Stalin to come here and plan a new Europe. All three went to the special shelter where Hitler was lying in a divan with a bandage around his forehead. Himmler asked him what were his plans. Hitler looked at them, then he blurted out, "Call a peace conference or die in Berlin at the head of my troops. That's what we must do if we want to win immortality." In the passage, Goebbels gave Himmler a note in Hitler's handwriting. This is what it said: "I, Adolf Hitler, leader of the German people, will disappear, and my successor during the final period of this war will be my best friend, Heinrich Himmler. To all of you, my brothers in arms and companions of my victories, farewell." The next day, Himmler started peace negotiations. Report of an escape plan. Himmler may now be on his way to Japan. I have just had a report, which I cannot check, saying that Himmler told friends recently that he would flee by a long-distance submarine to Japan, should the end come for the Third Reich. The report adds that he may have already left. It is known that a few days ago Himmler was in the Baltic port of Lübeck. That may have been his starting point for Japan. Goebbels may accompany Himmler in a getaway attempt. This is a report of an assassination. Hitler was assassinated during the night of April the 21st in his headquarters under Berlin's Tiergarten. On the night, he presided over a war council in which Marshals Kesselring and Busch, Generals Scheurer, Guderian and Fritzler, Himmler, Göring and Goebbels were present. Hitler insisted on his plan to continue resistance on the Bavarian redoubt. Only Goebbels supported him. So intense became the atmosphere that when Kesselring, Busch, Himmler and Göring were invited to return the next day, they feared they would die, just as did those who opposed Hitler on the night of the Long Knives in June 1934. During the night, a few hours before the second meeting was held, there was a terrific explosion in Hitler's private rooms. He and all his guards were killed. That's the French radio quoting the Paris press. And then we have, on the British front, public shelters to close. Public and communal air raid shelters are to be closed immediately, the Ministry of Home Security announced last night. Some, such as street shelters, will be demolished when labour can be spared. Others, such as trench, basement or concrete park shelters, will not be destroyed or dismantled for the time being, probably not until after the war with Japan ends. People who have been living in tube station shelters will be told soon that they will have to go. About Anderson and Morrison shelters, you know, these are the shelters that go in people's gardens and make a kind of frame that you can sleep in your house. Now, bearing in mind there are thousands of Anderson shelters still about the country. About Anderson and Morrison shelters, the ministry said, those provided with free Anderson shelters may be dismantled provided the parts are stored or to be returned to the council on demand. People who want to keep their shelters may ask the council for purchase terms. Those bought privately will not be bought back by the government or by councils. ARP work going on in factories should be stopped, and existing shelters which seriously impede production may be removed subject to licences being obtained. And all these years later, there are still these shelters in people's gardens. Down here we have German prisoners' rations to be cut. Rations of German prisoners taken by the Americans are to be cut by 10%, an official at US headquarters said yesterday. This is because American troops, except mainly combat troops and hospital patients, are having their rations cut by 10%. Then we have some advertisements, one there for Singer motor cars. Today, these hands are victory in their grip. To their inborn skill, the nation owns its priceless air supremacy. Tomorrow, the same skill, highlighted by 5 years' devotion to the nation's cause, will return into making for the future's finest cars. And then on the back, I have Germans still love that man. He was led astray. Most outspoken reply when I took a poll of opinion in Weimar today on what was the German people thought of Hitler's reported death in Berlin was, "Das ist Pech," that's bad luck. It came from a 23-year-old Rhinelander discharged wounded 2 years ago and who had never been a member of the Nazi Party. He added, "I am sad, but perhaps that is the best way out. But Hitler was the only man who could have led us back again. The German people still really love him." This reply and others have convinced me that Hitler still grips the souls of most Germans. They excuse him by saying that he was led astray by the men round him, especially by Ribbentrop. This is what the Germans said about the Kaiser after the last war. I must have spoken to hundreds of people in the typically central German town of Weimar today. I put 5 questions to them, and I am sure that most of the answers were sincere. To my first question, have you heard that Hitler is dead? The replies were yes, 90%, no, 10%. Most of the no said they had not heard the news because they had no radio or current because of the Allied bombing. To my second question, do you believe that he is dead? 60% said yes, 30% said no, and 10% were uncertain. Of the no's, a few said Hitler's death had been reported so often that they did not believe it anymore. One farm labourer said, "It is just a trick. The big Nazi shots are getting out and leaving us in the dirt." Question number 2, asked of those who believe that Hitler was dead, are you glad or sorry? Sorry said 65%, and 35% said glad. An old charwoman voiced the opinions of most of the glads when she said, "Of course I'm glad. He brought hell to us, then he goes and dies on us. Before he died, he should have been shown our bombed towns and cities." A municipal employee expressed what most of the sorries thought. He said, "I'm sad because Hitler was good and wanted only good. The trouble was that he was surrounded by too many little Hitlers who misinformed him and led him astray. He wanted only a motor road across the Polish corridor." He said he thought Germany was justified in taking slave labourers, then overrun countries for work in German factories and fields and being allowed to die by the thousands in concentration camps if they refused work. I asked him what he would say if the Russians or we took him away to forced labour. "No," he replied. "That would not be right. Ours was a war measure. The other would be revenge." My fourth question, do you think it was Hitler's fault that Germany lies wrecked and beaten now? 60% said Hitler was not to blame and 40% said it was his fault. For the first time, I got a unanimous reply when I asked my fifth question, do you think the appointment of Grand Admiral Dönitz as Führer means that he will try to make peace? Yes, 100% said. In a few days was the general verdict. So quite an interesting outlook on Germans in a particular area. So we have a little advert here. Ever ready batteries. We're not shooting a line, but we're very proud of the fact that since the early 1942, we've been busy making Patriot anti-tank bomb projectors, busy helping to ensure direct hits as well as close shaves. But when Patriots aren't needed anymore, ever-ready razors will be sweeping the toughest bristles into unconditional surrender. And we have another little bit. Berlin falls. Civilian prisoners included press chief Flick and propaganda councillor Heinrich Dorsch. The communique does not mention Lieutenant General Raymond, who, according to Goebbels' final speech, had been charged with the military defence of Berlin. 7 generals were captured in the mopped-up pocket. It was Moscow's grandest night of triumph, with all Russian radio stations entirely devoted to the orders of the day. And these are the words with which Stalin announced the fall of Berlin. Troops of the First White Russian Front, commanded by Marshal Zhukov, in cooperation with troops of the First Ukrainian Front, commanded by Marshal Konlev, today, May the 2, after stubborn street battle, completed the rout of the Berlin garrison and captured the city of Berlin, the capital of Germany, the centre of German aggression, and the heart of German imperialism. Footnote: President Truman told his press conference yesterday that on the best authority it is possible to obtain, Hitler is dead. Mr. Churchill intends to announce the end of the war in Europe at the earliest convenient hour after it occurred. Should it come in the small hours of the morning, he will probably make his announcement on the radio at 9 AM. If it were later in the day, he would cut into the programme within a few minutes of the news reaching him. He will probably speak from the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. The announcement, either that unconditional surrender has been accepted or that organised resistance by the German forces has ceased, is likely to be followed by a reminder that the Japanese remain to be defeated. And that's how a newspaper in Britain, the Daily Express, reported the news on this day, May the 3rd, 80 years ago. Bye for now.